All right, so we're going to be talking about this article by Michael KLENK, which is from yeah, a textbook, and this slideshow is a fairly close um, companion to the article by Michael KLENK, but it's not entirely the same. I may talk about some of the kind of things he talks about at the end. So, I mean, the basic issue is about trying to think about how does evolutionary theory impact our understanding of morality. And what we're going to see is that it's done that in some good ways and some ways which we would take that to be highly problematic. And then there's other ways in which they're sort of interesting and thought-provoking, but we may or may not agree with them. We are looking. We're going to start off talking about the sociobiologist E.O. Wilson, who in his 1975 book, Sociobiology, he argued that basically evolution completely explains morality, which is a big claim, right? I mean, certainly, I think these days, I mean, not according to everyone, but according to most people, the theory of evolution is true and basically explains a lot about human nature. All right, so I think therefore we would want evolution to shed light on morality too. Right? The idea is that if you understand humans, then you understand morality. And so E.O. Wilson argued that morality is just a product of evolution. Now, I guess it's worth saying a bit about what the theory of evolution is, because it turns out that a lot of students don't actually study evolution in high school, and they also don't study it in college. So some people have only a very hazy idea about what the theory of evolution says. So that is definitely a kind of a big issue, and there may be some misunderstandings. So basically the theory of evolution says that all life on Earth comes about through a process of evolution. And it says that initially there were some very simple organisms, and they came about as a process, as basically as a sort of random process, but they were very simple, but they started to have the ability to reproduce. And that meant that the whole process of evolution started. Those very simple organisms, which were in the oceans, started to get more and more sophisticated, and there were various kind of pretty simple but then more sophisticated organisms and then creatures existing in the sea. And eventually some of those sea creatures moved from the sea to the land, and they adapted to the land, and eventually all the life on Earth started existing through that process. And also That process basically works by we have reproduction from one generation to the next, and when an organism reproduces, there is a process of genetic variation. So not all of the next generation are genetically identical to the prior generation. So there's some genetic variation in the offspring, and some of those offspring are going to be better adapted to a particular environment than others. And the ones which are better adapted are going to have more success at procreating. So the more they procreate, the more that they distribute their genes. And for them, then their genes are also there's going to be more genetic variation. So the idea is that through generation to generation, you get creatures which are better and better adapted to particular environments and better at surviving. And that means that you can explain all of life on Earth through this process of evolution. Not just animal life, but also plant life, just everything. So it's a very ambitious project, and I guess we might wonder to what extent it's, as a scientific theory, we are able to actually fill in all the gaps. Seems like maybe there are a bunch of gaps, but certainly there's a lot of belief that among scientists that this is the right paradigm for the explanation, and all of life on Earth can be explained in that way. So that's that's a very much a thumbnail sketch of the process of evolution, but that's the basic idea. So certainly in the 19th century, when this was proposed by Charles Darwin and then followed by others, it was seen to be as a huge threat to religion, because rather than saying that humans were created by God, it said that humans were created as a random process. So basically the assumption of evolution is that there are no supernatural factors in the creation of human life. It's all just a process of survival of the fittest from one generation to the next, and gradual genetic changes which will then lead to different species and the evolution of different species. All right, so that threatens the story of creation of many religions, but then it also threatens the accounts of morality. Religion says that morality is delivered by supernatural beings, and that humans have to follow the laws given by those supernatural beings. Evolution says that the theory of evolution, especially the theory of evolution as set out by E.O. Wilson, says that morality evolved as something which was functional for human societies. So the idea is that human society does better when it has rules of cooperation. And we've seen previously the work of anthropologists saying that all human societies share basic rules of cooperation. And the idea is those basic rules of cooperation and helping people will lead to more functional societies, and those more functional societies will be better at reproducing. So the idea is that the whole of human morality evolved because it was more adaptive than other approaches. So this very much conflicts with the views that you get from religion, but it also conflicts with the views that you get from some philosophers. Some philosophers say that we understand morality through rationality. And so the idea is that we come to understand some pre-existing moral reality through our rational function. Somewhat analogous to how we understand math through our rational function. The idea is like there's a whole mathematical reality which we come to understand through rationality. But this approach advocated by E.O. Wilson says, no, there's no such thing as like some pre-existing morality which humans come to understand. Morality is just a matter of humans adapting to various environments and learning to behave in certain ways because those are adaptive ways to behave. So E.O. Wilson he ends up endorsing what is called a methodological naturalism. And so this is very much a naturalistic approach to ethical questions. And we're going to separate out two forms of naturalism, but they are very closely connected. There's methodological naturalism and metaphysical naturalism. So the basic idea for methodological naturalism is that the only way to understand the world is through science. And the only sciences that are relevant to human behavior are things like anthropology, which looks at different societies and how they behave and the rules they have. There's biology, which is obviously the study of the human body and other kind of biological organisms. There's evolutionary theory, which we've just been talking about. There is psychology, which is understanding not just the human mind, but all animal minds and seeing how minds work. There's sociology, which looks at the way that societies operate, social groups operate. And then there are some other human sciences too, but those are the main ones. So methodological naturalism says that those are the sciences which are relevant to understanding human life. Therefore, if you want to understand human life and if you want to understand morality, those are the ways we should do it, by doing those sciences. So E.O. Wilson would probably then say that there are other departments of universities with people claiming to give insight into morality. In particular, there are religion departments and there are philosophy departments. And it's pretty clear that what E.O. Wilson would say about that is like, those religion departments and those philosophy departments should be eliminated. All the religion professors should be fired, and all the philosophy professors should be fired, because they're not doing science, and the only legitimate way to understand morality is by doing science. So he's very much a sort of a positivist guy who wants to say that there is no independent morality, either created by supernatural beings or existing as in some independent metaphysical reality. The only kind of morality that exists, if there is any morality at all, is in the natural world, and the only method to understand the natural world is by science. So the methodological naturalism is about how we study reality, and metaphysical naturalism is simply the claim that the only reality that exists is the natural world. So metaphysical naturalism completely rejects any kind of supernatural ideas. It rejects the idea that there's any insight to be gained by studying God or gods or any sort of supernatural phenomena. Basically, the only phenomena that exist are natural ones. Anything which is supernatural is just bogus. There's no such thing. So it's a pretty hardcore view. It's like science is everything, and that's how we should understand the world. Right. So as I've already sort of explained, this methodological naturalism is very much at odds with mainstream analytic philosophy. So the sort of approaches we've seen in philosophy to say, like, we need to understand rationality, and rationality will tell us about morality. We've seen that from the views of Thomas Aquinas. We've seen that in Kant. And to some extent, that idea is there in the views of John Stuart Mill. And certainly E.O. Wilson is going to say, all that is nonsense. There is no morality to be discovered by philosophy like that. The only morality that exists is the morality that's in the natural world, and the only ways to understand morality are through anthropology, psychology, biology. Possibly, I think this is a sort of a bit of a stretch, but maybe in literary sources too. Maybe that's in some ways that's kind of related to anthropology. You see what people believe. So we can understand different cultures. None of that assumes that one morality is better than another. It's all basically a descriptive process, seeing what morality is there. So in some ways, one of the things that's nice about it is that it's very kind of open-ended. It's sort of non-judgmental about which morality is right. It just says that there's all these different kinds of morality in different human societies. And as I've already explained, metaphysical naturalism just rejects anything supernatural. It rejects any sort of religious truth. And it just believes in science. So definitely, if you believe in gods or spirits or probably the afterlife. I mean, I guess maybe you could be a naturalist and believe in the afterlife if there is some way in which there could be a science of the afterlife. And you do see on TV various TV shows where you have things like ghost hunters who are trying to use scientific methods to investigate ghosts. So, and certainly in the end of the 19th century, there was a lot of interest in the idea of the scientific study of things like the afterlife and communicating with the dead, the scientific study of seances and Ouija boards and all of that stuff. People thought, oh yeah, you could really have a science of that. The philosopher William James was very interested in altered states of consciousness. He himself was a user of nitrous oxide as a way to try and get himself into a different mental state. And there was a real belief that you could have a scientific study of other states of being. Those ideas became much less popular in like the 20th century, and in some ways I think they're not very popular now, although there has actually been a resurgence in recent years in the idea of looking at hallucinogens, especially drugs like LSD, maybe ecstasy. Is the idea that they can in some ways provide real insights into other ways of being. But I mean, those ideas still seem pretty much on the fringes of science, and there are no university departments where researchers take a lot of acid and try to discover a other realm. So any sort of quasi-scientific study of other realms of being through drugs is very much not done in universities. It's done in other ways. All right. So, but basically, the naturalism is assuming that mainstream science like physics, chemistry, biology, anthropology, sociology, psychology, those are the true sciences. And everything else is just nonsense. Religion is just nonsense. There are all those stories, religious stories are just made up stories which don't really correspond to reality at all. So certainly if you're a naturalist, it's going to be pretty hard for you to believe in morality at all, because you're going to have to say morality, any sort of true morality is a part of the natural world, and that seems hard to adapt. Or maybe you're just going to end up being some sort of relativist, but and saying morality is just whatever a particular society believes in, but and that doesn't seem like a very satisfactory form of morality. All right, so let's move on to a slightly different use of evolution. Okay, so one of the big movements in the 19th century was social Darwinism. It's especially associated with thinker Herbert Spencer, but it became very popular. And eventually it led to a lot of the eugenic movement. And it led to the idea that we need to encourage the breeding of some people and discourage the breeding of other people. And so so eugenics is especially notorious as being embraced by the Nazis. The Nazis argued that the German race is, as if the Germans or the Teutonics or the kind of European race was like the superior race, and other races were inferior. The Nazis are especially notorious for their program to eliminate the Jews. And they claimed that Jews are not just inferior, but somehow destructive to civilization. So they aim to, their project of the Holocaust was to eliminate all the Jews. Now, obviously, we see that as one of the most terrible parts of 20th century history. But it's also very much in line with many other racist beliefs, and certainly that kind of eugenic belief was used to try and justify slavery. So it was that kind of social Darwinism was highly problematic, and is very much in conflict with one of the other main movements of the 19th century going back to the 18th century, which is the idea that everyone is equal. So, and we certainly looked at that idea previously. We've looked at feminism, which saying that men and women are equal. We've looked at various other movements, which basically says all humans are equal. And social Darwinism and eugenics is very much in conflict with those ideas of equality. Now, social Darwinism is especially linked to the ideas of breeding. Now, breeding you see very much in farming, where farmers try to breed certain animals to perfect certain animals. But there's also, we see breeding in other animals. In the US, you hear quite a lot about dog breeding. Now, one form of dog breeding is where you have a dog show and you have various varieties of different kinds of dogs, and there's a competition to have the best of show for each of those different kinds, and ultimately a best dog for that kind of dog. And it turns out actually today being March the 9th of 2023 is actually the first day of the Crufts Dog Show in the UK. And if you go on YouTube, you can actually find the Crufts Dog Show being shown live. And they have various competitions for dogs to find the best dog. So there's the idea that you can breed the right kind of dog through a careful program of breeding. In New York, we're also familiar with the idea of breeding pit bulls for dogfighting. And you may well have heard of various dogfights and people engaging in dogfights and dog owners breeding pit bulls to be the most aggressive dog possible. So certainly it is possible to breed dogs in those ways, to develop certain traits. You can do that with farm animals too. So you get the best kind of most useful farm animal for human purposes. And we're talking about farm animals later on in the course too. But the idea when it applies to humans is in some ways that what evolution does is breed people to be selectively adaptive to particular environments. And but also similar to the idea of there being a competition among dogs or being a competition among other kinds of animals, human evolution is a sort of competition to deliver the best kind of humans. So that led social Darwinists to say that some humans are better than others, and that some people are less fit. Now, I think one thing we need to be very clear about is, like, what does Darwin's theory of evolution say, and how is that either interpreted or misinterpreted by social Darwinists? So certainly it's true that some humans are going to be more adapted to some environments than others. But it takes an extra step to conclude that some humans are better than others. All right. Also, I guess the idea that some humans are better than others seems to eliminate the idea that there's a particular environment that humans are well adapted to. So it may be that humans who are adapted to one environment will they wouldn't fare so well in a different environment. Whereas social Darwinists seem to think like, oh, there are some humans who are just better than others, whatever the environment. So there's also a sort of mistake there. All right. So we are pretty familiar with the idea that there is kind of racism of various kinds, and that was very popular in the 19th and 20th century, maybe popular still in the 21st century. One of the most notable kinds of eugenics that came up in the early 20th century was thinking about people who were labeled as unfit. And the idea, one of the big worries about a sort of social welfare state where everybody is treated well is that it encourages the wrong sort of people. It encourages people who would otherwise, if you had a system of survival of the fittest, would die. And so the worry is that human society, where you interfere with the process of evolution, leads to a degeneration of the race. And so there was a lot of eugenics talk at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century in the United States. And that sort of came to a head with the trial of Buck v. Bell, which was decided by the US Supreme Court in 1927. So I mean, this trial is a very important trial, partly because it's so representative of beliefs which were very common in the early 20th century. So, I mean, often when you talk about racism, you tend to think of like it being something which is very much at the kind of a few extremists in like places, especially in the extreme, in the far south, and the idea is though is just a bunch of extremists who are out on the fringes of society. One of the things that the case of Buck v. Bell really makes clear is that this kind of eugenics was very much at the heart of mainstream American thought. So the central figure in Buck v. Bell was Carrie Buck. Carrie Buck, I think when the initial decision was made, and I think it wasn't, the whole process didn't actually take a huge length of time. It was like a couple of years from the initial decision to be going up through various courts to the Supreme Court. I think it was a couple of years. So Carrie Buck was, I think she had a sort of checkered past, and she had become institutionalized in the Virginia State Colony for epileptics and the feeble-minded. Obviously, that phrase "feeble-minded" is itself pretty problematic. Right? Certainly, it's not a phrase we use today as a scientific term. Now, she had got pregnant at the age of 17, and so this was seen to be highly problematic. And a sign that she had a lesser morality because she wasn't a virginal girl, and also it was a sign that this kind of person would have lots of kids and would cause lots of problems for society, because all these people who were feeble-minded would be having kids and causing massive social problems and going against the whole idea of the survival of the fittest. So the people in charge in the state of Virginia, and this was a much wider social movement than just being in Virginia, wanted to have Carrie Buck sterilized. So she would no longer be able to reduce the racial purity in the United States. So there was a movement to have her sterilized, and then a protest was organized, but it was actually organized by the people who wanted to have her sterilized because they wanted to have basically a show trial. So both both the people who wanted the sterilization and those who were defending Carrie Buck were chosen by the same group of people. So she had no choice in her lawyers, and she was never really defended. And the defense that was put on for her was a very feeble defense. And you can see that for some of the basic facts of the case. So experts testified that Carrie Buck, her mother, and her baby daughter were all mentally deficient. Now, so there you were in the 1920s. Did they have a measure of mental deficiency? The only sort of scientific test they had was called the Binet test. And the Binet test was explicitly not designed to be a test of individual intelligence. It was designed to be a test of overall population intelligence. So you got a lot of people to take it, and then you got an average. It wasn't designed to be a test of individual intelligence. So the fundamental science behind the Binet test was not appropriate to be used as evidence that she was mentally deficient. The other, one of the other obvious problems was, like, the experts testified that her baby was mentally deficient. But her baby was 8 months old. Now, if you've had an experience with an 8-month baby, like, what can you say? It's like, oh, they're not, like, talking normally, they're not kind of showing appropriate socialization. It's an 8-month baby. Like, what kind of test do you expect it to take? What kind of evidence would you have that this is a mentally deficient baby? There is no such possible evidence. Maybe there are some developmental markers. If you actually look at the history of the kid was taken away from Carrie Buck and went on to be basically a normal kid in school. So the claim that the baby was mentally deficient was just completely wrong. Carrie Buck herself, after the trial, she did not remain institutionalized. She got married, and she lived independently with her husband. She also had a correspondence with the people who had been in the state colony, so she was capable of writing actually relatively long, detailed letters to people. And if you're capable of writing long, detailed letters to people, that suggests also that you're not mentally deficient. So it seems that the evidence that Carrie Buck and her kid were mentally deficient was entirely fabricated. Yet the defense did not actually give any major defense of her, did not question the claim of the experts. Then there was a claim about her promiscuity, because she got pregnant. And it turns out the reason she got pregnant was that she was raped. It wasn't that she was, like, engaging in lots of promiscuous sex. She had been raped by one of the men in one of the households where she'd been living. So again, the evidence that she was kind of morally unsound principles and that she was running around with boys, sort of thing, this wasn't true. So this Buck v. Bell trial was basically rigged. The defense didn't do anything to argue for her, and she was sterilized. So the Supreme Court voted, and this is less than 100 years ago, voted 8-1 in favor of a state's rights to sterilize people that it considered a genetic threat. Like I said, this wasn't a bunch of kind of extreme people out in the countryside. This was like some of the most established people in the United States. So on the Supreme Court at that time, there was Oliver Wendell Holmes, who wrote the opinion. Another member of the Supreme Court at that time was William Howard Taft, who had been a president of the United States. So this is like nothing more established than that one of the presidents of the United States. There was also Justice Louis Brandeis, after whom Brandeis University, which is up in Boston, was founded. He was Jewish. You might naively hope that somebody who was Jewish would be more worried about the social pressures which would be put on minorities and would defend the rights of minorities, but he voted in favor of sterilization. The only dissenting vote was Justice Pierce Butler. He was a Catholic. Maybe his Catholicism was related to his voting against the decision, but he never actually wrote an opinion, so we have no idea why he voted against it. So it was very much a very establishment opinion. And so this decision was a major victory for the U.S. eugenics movement. And here's a quotation from the judgment. You know, it's a long legal case. This is what Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote. He said, "It would be strange if it could not accord." This is like the U.S. It would be strange if it could not call upon those who already sap the strength of the state for these lesser sacrifices. The lesser sacrifices being sterilized. Often not felt to be such by those concerned. The idea is, well, if you're feeble-minded, you don't care about being sterilized anyway. So, well, certainly Carrie Buck was not necessarily happy about it. In order to prevent our being swamped with incompetence. So the idea is these feeble-minded people are incompetent. If you had survival of the fittest, these feeble-minded would be eliminated from society. And so we don't want to eliminate them by killing them, but it's okay to sterilize them so they no longer reproduce. And obviously part of the theory there is that being feeble-minded is a genetic trait, and if you are a feeble-minded adult, then you will have feeble-minded children. So he says, it is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring, so the idea is if you're feeble-minded, you're going to have degenerate offspring who are going to be criminals, or they're going to starve. So the idea is society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. The principle that sustains compulsory vaccination is broad enough to cover cutting the fallopian tubes. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. So that was Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who is sometimes cited as a kind of liberal. But that doesn't seem like a very liberal view, right? That seems a pretty shocking conservative view. Now, the Buck v. Bell decision was very much admired by the Nazis in Germany. They look how well the U.S. is doing with its eugenics movement. It's legalizing the sterilization of those it deems unfit. So in some ways, the eugenicists in Germany were admiring of the U.S. and like how far they were progressing, and it took them some time. Obviously, the eugenics movement overtook Germany and became extremely powerful and led to the Holocaust, among other things. After the Second World War, it became politically unfeasible to have sterilization laws on the books. So places like Virginia and other states which had sterilization laws eventually got rid of those sterilization laws. Although it took them some time. I mean, the programs may have been cut back. The laws, I think, existed often until the 1960s and 1970s. But one of the most shocking things about this is that the Supreme Court has never overturned Buck v. Bell. So it is still constitutional, according to the Supreme Court, to sterilize people who are unfit, according to US law. There has never been a challenge which has led to the overturning of Buck v. Bell. And maybe if there was a challenge, it would be overturned, but it has not been overturned. I mean, so a fundamentally eugenicist law is still constitutional in the US. All right. So, I mean, this question. I mean, in some ways, we can definitely see how that is highly problematic from a moral point of view. But we might also want to think about what is morally problematic about it. And we're going to look at a couple of people. We're going to look at the philosophy of David Hume, and also briefly at some of the ideas of the philosopher G.E. Moore. So David Hume was an 18th century Scottish philosopher, and in some ways he was very much against religious morality, and he was very much against the views which would later come out from Immanuel Kant. So his views that basically morality is just a matter of feelings. But one of his main claims, which has been very influential, is that just looking at the world is not going to tell us what to do. So you can have any number of scientific theories. Those scientific theories that will tell you how the world is, they do not tell you how the world should be. So one of the main ideas you would see, and this is summarized in a slogan, which says that you cannot derive an ought from an is. So you can say how the world is, you can look at like how things are, how people behave. That doesn't tell you how they should behave. So the basic idea is for Hume is that no theory of evolution and the survival of the fittest, which tells us how humans have survived and have evolved, is not going to tell us that we should operate that way. So basically, it may well be true that survival of the fittest is a way that evolution operates, but that doesn't mean that survival of the fittest is how we should operate. So just because people more suited to a particular environment will survive better does not imply that we should try and live or create society using survival of the fittest. You have to, if you're going to try and do that, you have to make an assumption that there's something fundamentally good about evolution and that we should try and maintain survival of the fittest. And that would definitely go against ideas of equality and the idea that we should give support to everyone. We should have some, or the idea that we should have a kind of welfare state. And the thing, I mean, the idea that survival of the fittest is best is a kind of idea that nature is best, and that it's wrong to interfere with the methods of nature. Now, we saw one form of natural law in the ideas of Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas thinks that evolution, he doesn't believe in evolution. He believes that the world is created by God, and he thinks that the world makes sense because everything has a purpose. Now, definitely neither Hume nor the Darwinists are going to believe in that. But the social Darwinists seem to believe in the idea that nature is good and that we should live according to nature in terms of survival of the fittest. And Hume is going to say, well, there's just you just have no justification for that. Now, I can briefly mention the British philosopher G.E. Moore, who lived later than Hume. So he was born in the 19th century, and then he had most of his adult life in the 20th century, and he lived through both world wars. He lived through the rise of Hitler and Nazi Germany, and he saw the end of that. And he was very much against social Darwinism and the views of Spencer. His arguments were kind of abstract, but they were they're basically very similar to the ideas of David Hume. So, but what Moore says is that you can't identify goodness or the good as a simple property. Well, he thinks it is a simple property. You can't define it in terms of other things. Can't be defined in terms of more basic properties. So he said you can't identify good with being more highly evolved. So he thought that the work of Spencer and social Darwinism was relying on a fallacy which he called the naturalistic fallacy, identifying the moral property of good with some kind of property of nature. All right. So social Darwinism seems to be very problematic and something we would totally want to reject these days. But does that mean there's no role for understanding evolution in terms of ethics? And so I want to spend a little time looking at ways that other philosophers have thought about that. In some ways, most of their work has been somewhat destructive of ethics and skeptical about ethics. So in some ways, I think the answer is, if you are really going to believe in evolution, then you're not going to really believe in moral realism at all. So we're going to look at some of the ideas of the philosopher Michael Ruse and Sharon Street. All right. So one central idea we've already seen in the idea of E.O. Wilson is that evolution can explain to some extent why we believe in morality, because it's socially adaptive to do so. In the article by KLENK, he quotes the scientist Sarah Hardy, who has a sort of thought experiment. She describes the experience of being on a plane, which is a pretty unpleasant experience for the most part. And certainly people are kind of rude to each other on planes, and like this, you have to sort of suppress your various impulses on a plane. And so she imagines what it would be like if instead of humans, you put a bunch of chimps on a plane. And she said, well, if you put a bunch of chimps on the plane, they would all like just fight each other. They're not all just going to sit there and enjoy the ride. They're going to engage in fighting and biting, and you'll be lucky if none of them is killed, and certainly there'll be a bunch of fingers and earlobes missing by the end of the ride. So there are, for chimps, which I think Hardy is assuming don't really have much morality, they will just engage in fighting. So humans who have morality engage in cooperativeness, and we suppress our violent tendencies, and so we can get on a plane ride and not get in a fight with anyone. I mean, occasionally people do get in fights, but generally we're pretty good at avoiding fights. So the basic idea is that human cooperation is enhanced by morality. And so it explains why morality exists, because it's an evolutionary adaptive trait to tend to get on with our fellow humans. So groups with those traits would have had a reproductive advantage, and the idea is that morality would be favored by the theory of evolution and survival of the fittest. So it's a very interesting idea. Can we actually prove that's what happens and that's why we have morality? I think that is that's a big ask. I mean, like, how, can we look at the evidence and show that this is what evolution did? I mean, the main evidence we have from evolution is our DNA structure and various bones which are discovered by people doing archaeological digs. Now, looking at people's bones is not going to tell you much about their social conventions. So you have to do a lot of speculation in order to really kind of come up this theory that morality is delivered by evolution. I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it seems pretty speculative. So I think it would be a mistake to say science has proved that morality was created by evolution, but it's certainly a possibility, and it's an interesting one. Now, Michael Ruse, who was originally a British philosopher, and then he moved to Florida State. I think he is emeritus at this stage. Well, then maybe he's still working. He argued that evolutionary theory gives us a reason to doubt the reality of moral principles. So yeah, he definitely thinks that morality was created by evolution, but his point is this, that there's no reason to think that morality is actually real. It's just a bunch of rules or emotions that humans have, and there's no reason to think it corresponds with some sort of metaphysical reality. So his point is that we're inclined to believe morality, but the reason we have that sort of susceptibility to believe in morality is because evolution made us believe in it. Basically, his view is that morality made us dupes. So we have a natural credulity to believe in morality. Now, the philosopher Sharon Street has made a similar argument. So she thinks that our morality derives from evolution. So she thinks our moral judgments are molded by evolution. And like Michael Ruse, she thinks that there's no reason to think that evolution tracks moral truth. So she also argues there's no reason to think that our moral judgments are true. So like Ruse, she thinks we should reject moral realism. Now, I guess one thing to say about that is, like, so both of them are saying, morality is actually not true. So, I mean, you might wonder, well, how does that impact their everyday life? Now, if they don't believe in morality, then if you annoy them, does that mean they're going to stab you? Well, I mean, one obvious thing is, like, they're college professors, and stabbing people is against the law, and not only are they law-obeying people, but they also are not advocating that other people go and stab each other, and they're not advocating that laws be abolished. So they do seem to be in favor of having kind of a calm society run by laws. So they're not total anarchists, they're not against nice behavior. They are very much in favor of just regular behavior, having law-abiding people as a sort of social convention, because life is better for everyone. But they just don't think that the morality that people believe in is actually true.